Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very, very special episode of The Backwards Traveler. I am Andy Nichols. You may know me from two other podcasts, Hands Across the Water and also Two Legs. But here on this channel, it's everything but Beatles and solo. And today, I'm really proud to have two friends of mine on to discuss a really forthcoming cool archive set from The Who. Joining me today is Matt Kent and Jeff Slate. Hi, gents.
Good evening, Andy.
Good evening, good afternoon. Those of you who don't know, Matt Kent is a photographer and journalist, and he has worked for The Who, and he's the author of this behemoth, Anyway, Anyhow, Anywhere, that he wrote with Andy Neill, which came out way back when, which is, again, a Who Bible for any Who freak out there. He's written liner notes for tons of albums out there, most recently the 50th anniversary of Who's Next / Lifehouse, which came out in 2023. Loads of compilations, and he is the Who authoritative man there. Also joining us today, Jeff Slate, New York City-based musician and journalist. Jeff's latest album, The Last Day of Summer, is available now. You can go to Jeff Slate HQ for that. He also co-authored a book on Earl Slick. That's also available, who worked with David Bowie. And Jeff has written liner notes for all sorts of people, including the Beatles, Bob Dylan, you name it, Tom Petty, everybody. So very honored to have you both here today to discuss an album which, as Matt and I talked off air, I have felt deserved deluxe box set treatment for about a decade. And I even emailed Matt back in 2018 and said, is this a possibility? We've got Tommy. We've got Quad. Why not Who Are You? It's Keith Moon's last album. Surely there's enough in the vaults for this to come out. And sure enough, a couple of weeks ago, it get announced. And I said, Matt, I'm going to find that email. Tell me more about it. And he was more than happy to join us today. So, Matt, welcome to the show and give us a bit of a backstory on the whole project overall before we dive in deep.
Well, thanks for having me, Andy, and thanks for asking me. Well, I suppose it all starts, I don't know if you know about how long these box sets are in production, but it's probably about 18 months or so ago that we started. There's a lot of production issues at the moment with vinyl and things like that. So record companies have to get in early to get things printed up and stuff like that. But it's the latest in the series of the sort of special deluxe edition of the Who's back catalogue. As you say, the previous one was Who's Next. There are a few that's sort of come in between that haven't seen the light of day yet, such as By Numbers and a quick one. But whether they ever do see the light of day is I'm not at liberty to say. I got in trouble too much for talking about Who Are You on a previous podcast before it was announced. So well, I'm not going to talk about anything. But
this is free and clear and it's out. So exactly. Everybody out there is excited, and it's it's an album that I think at the time when we corresponded, you were like, I wonder if there's enough material in the vaults, and clearly there is.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I mean, when we talked 7 years ago, I thought, yeah, we've got some live stuff. I know that. But whether there was enough material from the studio, outtakes and other stuff, I wasn't sure, because I knew, it was a troubled recording. Probably everyone knows the stories of some of the things that happened during the recording. So I wasn't sure there was enough, but given sort of a free rein on this one, to curate what there was. I worked closely with John Astley and we went through what was in the vaults. And there was an amazing amount of stuff. As you know, enough for 7 CDs, which I never thought we'd see. When I first started the project, I told Universal that I thought, maybe 4 CDs, we could stretch to 4 CDs. But there was such a wealth of material, including a lot of stuff, rehearsal stuff with Keith that's never been heard before. And we are literally listening to Keith's last recordings, basically. And they're fantastic. The sense of fun during the rehearsals, which, you get a snapshot of when in the Kids Are All Right movie, when they're doing the Barbara Ann bit. Mm-hmm. And there's a real sense of camaraderie and fun there. And so, it just grew and grew. And, we probably could have even put more material in. But, I think what we've got is a really good snapshot of those years, 1977 through to 78 and a little bit beyond 79.
To encapsulate
the live stuff, yeah.
with the live stuff to obviously with Kenny Jones and Rabbit and all that stuff. But is there a twinge of sadness maybe associated with this project that maybe they, that the band and, the labels steered away from it because it was Keith's last album?
Yeah. I mean, in the notes, I do write that I think the album was overshadowed by Keith's death. It never got the sort of airplay, other than obviously Who Are You, which has just been, it outgrew every other track on the album. But I think the death of Keith did overshadow it, and then there was talk of what the band going to do in the future, etc. I don't think it ever got the same sort of critical analysis that the other albums got.
No, it certainly didn't. Jeff, talk about kind of Pete's writing approach on this album, because it's not a very typical Who sounding record at all.
No, I mean, I think that's what's really interesting about digging into the bonus discs on this, is that you get a sense of, certainly from the Glyn Johns mix, what the album might have been in other hands. I mean, I think, I've always thought of this as a very synth-driven record, and, the remaster really makes that, it's a very crisp, warm sound, but the Glyn Johns mix is much more a guitar-oriented mix. And I think from a Who fan standpoint, it's just fun to hear because it's a very different approach to it. But as far as, Pete's writing was sort of all over the place at this time. And, Matt talks about this in his liner notes that, there's bits of Lifehouse, in this. There's just straight ahead demos that he was writing for the band. There's other stuff that, eventually made it to Empty Glass. There's a Who run through of the song Empty Glass. So I think, he'll deny this usually, but I do think even, or maybe particularly at that time, he was writing in buckets. He would sort of write, well, this is a Who song, right? This is a Pete song. And he, because he had just done the record with Ronnie Lane, and I don't think he was thinking so much in terms of Empty Glass and All the Best Cowboys and so forth, but he was always percolating on solo projects. So it's hard to say, look, you ask him on any day and you're going to get a different answer. But I think his approach was both classic Pete Townshend writing in the style of Who's Next and Lifehouse, and even, there's remnants of Who by Numbers in there as well, where he was trying out different styles and certainly stretching what the Who were comfortable with always. And then, punk was happening around him and disco was happening around him. So there's songs that literally address both of those things in one song. So, I think he's just a guy who's always looking for a muse and always looking for things to write about and write to. And, I think he's best, and he has certainly said this many times, and to me, that he's always good writing to a brief. And I think there wasn't a clear brief other than it's time to make a new record. And I think he was, the band were, Matt writes about this very well. I can let him address all this stuff in the liner notes. I think they were in a bit of a rut around this time, Who by Numbers wasn't really, and by the way, until not too long ago, Pete always considered Quadrophenia a failure, right?
Yes.
I remember talking to him early 90s. I remember having a conversation, I've talked about this recently with somebody, with Pete and Eddie Vedder and weirdly Scott Weiland at backstage at a show. And we were all talking about how significant Quadrophenia was to us. And he had always put everything on Tommy because it was always successful and always beloved. And to us, we were trying to explain to him that it wasn't our record. It felt a little long in the tooth. It was our older brothers' records, that Quadrophenia was like the late 70s record that everybody kind of grabbed onto, the sort of, next generation of Who fans that was on their turntable for the next 10 or 15 years. And I think that, he clocked that, and we had several conversations about it in the 90s about that before they started playing Quadrophenia live. But, I think at this point in 1977, 78, when they were working on these demos and then the recordings, I think Quadrophenia was seen as kind of a failure. They had maybe the movie. There was also maybe a Lifehouse movie happening, and it's a lot, and that was a frustration too to him. The Tommy movie had happened. The Who by Numbers album had gone, and I think as a live band, the Who by Numbers tour, they weren't even playing very many songs by Quadrophenia or Who by Numbers on that tour. So they had a very kind of love-hate relationship with their back catalog, because they were having to play My Generation Can't Explain every night, Substitute, and so I don't know. I think there's you hear a lot of frustration in these songs. I think from if you dig into the writing of them, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's interesting what you say about it being a synth album, because punk was so prevalent in the UK at that time, and Pete was such a big supporter of punk. You'd think that the influence of punk would have come through more in Who Are You? But he just turns his back on it and goes completely in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
We've got strings, we've got synths. There's no 3 chord wonders or 1 chord wonder even. It's very much a different album and against the flow of what was going on musically in Britain at the time.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because it's very far ahead of the New Romantics, and it has, that I always felt if it had come out at the time of It's Hard, it would have been a much more successful record than it, and again, it was, we're always, the elephant in the room is always that it was overshadowed by Moniz.
Keith. Yeah. I mean, when you think about the 70s Who, okay, they're riding the success. They come out in the early 70s, riding the success of Tommy. Pete does Lifehouse. It becomes this whole other thing, successful. Then they dive into Quadrophenia. That comes out, and that's 3 years. Tommy, Who's Next, and Quadrophenia. These are mammoth records, right? So now you've got, Odds and Sods drops, basically a Townshend autobiographical album with Who by Numbers, and then a break, and now this. So it's like when you look at the Who's journey through the 70s, it's very uneven, but because they put so much work into Quadrophenia, it's almost like what else is left in the tank other than to adapt with the times. And these lyrical themes of mortality are very present on Who by Numbers, and especially on Who Are You, and changing. That's the theme that you hear on these records.
I mean, one of the points I raised in the liner notes was, can you think of one other artist that could start an album with a song such as New Song? I write the same old songs with a few new lines. There's no one that would have that sort of bravery to do it. It's he's laying himself bare, and I think that's what jumped out at me at revisiting Who Are You, was that the lyrics do lay Pete bare again. And I think it was a definite change in the early days when Pete always said he held a mirror up to the audience. From the Who by Numbers, he was holding a mirror up to himself. And I think there is a distinct change in the way he writes from the Who by Numbers onwards.
Which I don't think he got back to until the most recent record. Who, I think very much. I will add to that, though, and Matt certainly writes about this, but I think it's important to recognize Tommy and Who's Next aside, although Who's Next had a pretty difficult birth, every Who record was difficult to make. The band had very complicated relationships with the records and the sessions, right? The producers and the sessions themselves and the internal battles and so forth. And you have to remember, throughout the 70s, they were the big live act, right? They were consistently the big live act. And the other thing was that particularly John and Keith's lifestyles demanded them being on the road almost all the time, right? To make the money to sort of perpetuate the lives they were living. Okay. And, Roger had his fish farm, and Pete loved, they had good lives, and Pete invested a lot of his money. There was, publishing and, other things, various projects, Eel Pie Studios and things like that. I know one of the most, demoralizing thing when we were working on a project together in the early 90s, and I wanted to do it at Eel Pie, and he said, "Oh, it's not even usable." Like it had just sort of fallen into disrepair. Studio takes time and money to keep up, right? So that's, that was what he was always pouring his money into. But the other thing is that, their albums weren't like out of the box successful record. I mean, Tommy was a huge smash because they toured it for years and years, and it just became, just grew and grew and grew. And Who's Next became pretty quickly, particularly in America, the Who record for the 70s. But other than that, even on both sides of those records, there's sort of, there's fan favorites and there's tracks that broke out, but none of them were like massive successes in their moment, right? And so I think as a writer, that's enormously frustrating. And as a band member, well, you want to go out and play Substitute and I Can See for Miles, because that's what the fans want, and you want to make that. I mean, the tickets were only $5, so you want to make that money. So, so I think there's a lot, there's a lot of backstory to the 70s that's very, very complicated. That has nothing to do with, the actual 9 songs or whatever it is that are on Who's Next that we're kind of going to pick apart for the next hour.
No, not at all. And it's like, you make a point here. They are touring in the 70s, obviously with Quadrophenia. We talk about synths on Who Are You? There's plenty of synths on Quad, right? So like as a live act, you're being called on and you're playing My Generation, all the 60s hits, and they're trying to evolve and play this stuff, and it's not really working. So the frustration as a band saying, look, that was us in the 60s. We want to do this now. And the technology was not there for them to do this stuff, and the frustration was there. They tour and they tour and they tour. And it just had to be frustrating for them to not be able to play this stuff live as well as they could have.
I think particularly for Pete. I think the band. I mean, Matt, correct me. I don't know any of the guys. I barely knew John, and I would never claim to know Roger, other than frenemies. But I think it was mostly Pete's frustration. I think the band were pretty happy to play the hits and get the crowd going and collect the money at the end of the night.
Sure.
Well, certainly at the end of the 76 tour, both Roger and Pete were frustrated at playing the same songs night after night.
Yeah, you write about that in the notes, and I just wondered if that was if that was retrospective or at the time.
No, that was at the time, because Pete even got to the stage where he told Bill he'd had enough and wanted out of the band. And Roger supported
that. I know,
yeah. Roger supported that there and then. But Roger loves touring. Roger likes being on the road. Roger, he gives Pete. This is my view that he gives Pete the room to write, and then he comes in and does his interpretation of what Pete has written. Very, it's never the twain shall meet in terms of what Pete writes. Roger does have a say in whether there's songs that he will sing or not. But other than that, I think, Roger needs to stretch himself as well, I feel, as a vocalist. And I think he felt that. And I think the problem was that they never gave themselves enough time with those albums in the 70s live. I mean, I saw the original Quadrophenia tour, and it was fantastic, But there were problems, particularly in the States, where American fans not just technology, but they didn't understand the story.
No,
right. So you had Roger describing it every night, what was going on. So it just broke
the bootlegs are painful.
Yeah.
It just broke the flow of it.
Yeah.
And I think by the time it come to the shows, the few shows they did in '74, Quadrophenia was gone. There was a few numbers, 515, whatever, Bellboy, but as a whole, as a concept, it had gone. And it's the same with Who by Numbers. I mean, there's some great tunes on the Who by Numbers. I mean, if they carried on playing things like Slip Kid, that would be, it'd be held in the same esteem as probably Who Are You is now.
Agreed.
There's great tracks on there, but they never gave it enough time. It was almost like it didn't work immediately, therefore we drop it.
Yeah, well, they were all restless. Pete was particularly restless. You got to remember too, just to add to what I was saying before, the Led Zeppelin toured in pockets, the Stones, we think about them always on the road, but in the 70s, it was very intermittent, right? The Who were constantly on the road. They were always, always, always on tour. So, you know, they were working at the pace, at a 60s pace in the 70s. And I think that's very, very hard to, you know, think of in real time and what that does to, you know, I mean, I think what you said about the tank being empty is, you know, it's a legitimate thing. I mean, a record was due. They had to, you know, they wanted the advance. Everybody wants their money.
Mm-hmm.
Pete delivers some songs. You know, there's more John. You know, there's a lot of Entwistle songs on this, and
Three.
You know, it's a very
songs
yes
on a 9-track
and he really
album.
stepped up. But you know, there's only 9 songs to begin with. When you think of every record before that, I mean, you know, how many are on Quadrophenia? Good God, and he wrote the whole thing. So yeah, I think the tank being empty thing is. I'll get punched in the face for this, but that's probably.
You're saying it, Jeff, not me.
You know, I'm used to it at this point.
That's our hot take guy right there, Jeff Slate.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Was there any kind of realization that, you know, was this the final album under the contract for Polydor? Like, meaning like if you don't deliver, you're going to get dropped. Like, was there that kind of those external pressures too from the label at that point in time?
I think the Who was such a big name. I don't think they would be getting that sort of pressure. It's certainly nothing I came across when I was researching it. I think it was just that single album tour cycle that they got into. You know, they'd finished the Who by Numbers tour, next thing, and it was just a matter of moving on to that. I mean, it was, you know, Jeff was saying about Pete not having different buckets to put different projects in. I mean, he was spinning plates. You know, I mean, he was involved in so many things. You know, he's doing Rough Mix. You know, he had the bookshop opening.
Well, at the bookshop, he's got the Quadrophenia film in production. He's got another version of Lifehouse in production. They've got the Kids Are All Right.
Kids Are All Right with Jeff Stein
is in production. Which there's various degrees of involvement in these things. But they've also, you know, they own a studio, they own a rehearsal studio. They, you know, they've got the touring company, you know, the gear, the touring company. Yeah. There's all this stuff going on, all these investments and all these, you know, and these are largely, although by that time they did have, you know, there was such a complicated relationship with their management over the years. Well, we now think, you know, Matt and I both know Bill Curbishley pretty well, and you know, we think it as such a tight ship now because it's, you know, he's been doing it for so long, but also it's so professionalized. But he was new on the case as the guy, right? Yeah. And there was the prior relationship that was, you know, sort of complicated and so forth. So, you know, all of these things running in the background make it very hard to be an artist in the moment. I mean, you have to think of it in those terms too.
Yeah, and also Pete was trying to reestablish himself as a family man. You know, he had a young family,
young kids,
and that was his priority at that stage, to be cut to work 9 till 5. You know, to do a day job, and I think that influenced a lot of the way the recording went on Who Are You? Sorry.
And I think you make a good point there with bringing up Bill Curbishley, because that's also a big backstory in this whole 70s Who landscape, like the exit of, you know, the other guys. And now Bill comes to the forefront and says, clear the decks. What's what? We're starting over. And this is how it's going to be. But when did Bill Curbishley actually take over? Was it 76 or before that?
De facto, it was earlier than that.
Yeah.
It was before 76.
Yeah, I mean, it you know, in essence, he was managing them around 74, 75.
Mm-hmm. Even maybe earlier, you know, it was, yeah. And you got, just to add another thing, you know, Kit Lambert who was such a huge supporter and instigator and muse and, you know, such a significant relationship in Pete's life, was in incredibly bad shape by this time. Yeah. And was in America and was just not available and was not the person he could bounce ideas off of. And I love Bill to bits, but that's not his role in the Who's management. And, you know, Pete thrives, you know, we don't think of him as a collaborative person, and he probably wouldn't say he's a collaborative person, but that was a collaboration that really worked for him. And it wasn't in true essence, like a Lennon-McCartney collaboration, but it was somebody a foil and a supporter, and just like, push, and try this. Nothing was too outlandish. I think that's a really important person. So to see that person, sort of disintegrating or just be absent from your creative process was incredibly complicated too. We're in the weeds. I mean, if you're not a Who fan at this point, and you're watching this, you better grab your Wikipedia
and start reading.
Yeah, I didn't know we were going to go this deep, but this is
no. Well, I think this all paints a backstory for what the album becomes ultimately.
Yeah,
and as you mentioned, people do associate it with Mooney, and I think at some point those three guys, especially Pete, knew that Keith was not taking care of himself, and that's a major part of this whole story too. Like, they knew that he was not well. And Matt and I talked about this before you came on, Jeff. Like, those shepherding rehearsals were a vehicle to kind of get Keith in shape, right, Matt?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, obviously they was doing the rehearsals for Jeff's cameras for The Kids Are All Right, but the other reason for doing it was to get Keith back from America and to get him behind the drum kit again. He wasn't in a good shape, and you mentioned Pete was concerned about Keith, but so was Roger. I mean, it wasn't a one-way street, Pete and Keith. Roger was concerned about him, and that's, I guess, another reason why at the end of the '76 tour, Roger was, he was behind Pete in not touring until they had something better for stage show-wise, because Keith obviously fell victim to everything that was on offer to him. He was an addictive personality in many ways, and any layoffs from the live shows, particularly once the '76 tour had finished, and Keith was in LA, that's when he started to deteriorate. And John said to me once that it was the lack of live work that killed Keith eventually. So the object was to get Keith back into shape, and the rehearsals are such fun, such a wealth of material there that I didn't expect when we started this. As I said to you earlier, Andy, when we wrote the Anyway in the Air book, we did list songs that they played during that rehearsal. But we got one of them wrong. We had one down as Run Baby Run. But when we listened to the tape back, it was actually Run, 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 right, for a quick one. And to hear the band in their 70s lineup, this heavy rock band by now, play this really 1960s little jingle. Mm-hmm. It's fantastic. I mean, it was one of the joys to me of working on this project, was finding things like that. And yeah, it's a really nice piece to put into it, having those rehearsals and Keith playing.
And I will add, as a fan, having seen the track list, and we're talking ahead of the release, I got to say, I was like, the legend is he wasn't in good shape. What are these going to sound like? Clearly he's rusty, but he's playing his ass off. I mean, I don't know what the breaks were like. He must have been huffing and buffing, but he sounds like Keith Moon, and the band is having, it sounds fun, which they weren't always having. There was such a mix of weird personalities there on in that band. Live was always, being on the road is a difficult thing anyway, but I just turned it up loud. I had it on recently. I just turned it up loud and let it run, and it was run, 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 and it was and it was great. I one thing to add though to what was being said about, Keith was the obvious and loudest addict in the band, but around this time, John and Pete were having their own struggles on either side of the making of this record that are pretty significant. And we could certainly get into that, but not that we have any inside info or anything. I think that's just the sort of, that's just the fact that everybody has talked about in the press and so forth. So, and an amazing journey in other places. So, and I think that's worth noting. It wasn't just, we got to get, they make it all magnetic. We're going to get Keith back in shape. They all needed to do that rehearsal. They all needed to get in that room and do it.
They needed to play together. I mean, I guess the other thing, the thing that sort of offsets that is that Pete was busy writing Roger was busy filming and doing a solo album, and John was producing other acts. So the others were busy. Keith didn't have that outlet.
It's a shame, really. And one of the tracks I see that's on the rehearsal, listed on the box set from the rehearsal, is Music Must Change. Now, we know the history and the complexity of that song and the fact that Keith couldn't play it.
No, I mean, the rehearsal, we're talking about the 79 rehearsals, aren't we? And Rabbit is unbelievable.
Unbelievable. Unreal how good Rabbit is. Yeah.
It's really to the fore, Rabbit's keyboards. And, you know, I listened to it when we first got the tape for it. And it was just one of those things that took you back to 79, that tour, and how good the band were as a 5-piece then. You know, it was a rebirth, and Rabbit added so much to it. And you could see why Pete has always wanted Rabbit to be the man around on keyboards.
Do you think the changing landscape of the musicians and some of the technology brought Rabbit into the band at that point? Like, obviously the synths and stuff like that, and him on?
Well, without a doubt. I mean, Pete wanted to sort of increase the breadth of what the band could do live. I mean, part of his brief, if he had one at all, for Who Are You, was to write an album that could be played live. Unfortunately, it didn't turn out like that. And you know, and they got back into that same old routine of doing the older stuff. But those early 79 shows, the experimentation that went on in those, I mean, you know, you think the Madison Square Garden shows, which unfortunately wasn't recorded, but some of the stuff they was doing there, like Big Boss Man, Pretty Vacant, you know, I would love to have seen those shows. I would love to have had a recording of them. But once the 79 shows were over, then it sort of set, and then Pete started obviously having his own problems. The shows become a bit more steady. You know, the set list becomes the same, but those rehearsals from 79 plus the live show really shows what a great band they were.
Oh, even post that. One thing that we talked about before we started recording too was there's these songs on here where Pete kind of lays down a guide vocal for Roger, and it sounds like a completely different song when Pete sings it versus when we hear Roger sing it. And we heard that when they dropped the pre-release of Pete's guide vocal version of New Song. Now, I think I listened to it like 20 times in a row. It sounds like a different song than when Roger sings it. I mean, I just wonder, when Pete wrote these songs and said, Roger, here's how it goes, you put your spin on it. I just wonder if Pete was like, look, I could do some of these myself and it'll be a whole different kind of song. He kind of deferred to Roger, and Pete doesn't have one lead vocal on this whole album. And I just wish he would have kept one or two of them for himself.
I think Pete's always, he's never been fully confident in himself when it comes to singing. And you've got to remember, by that stage, Roger was the lead singer.
Of course.
You know, in the world. You know, you had Robert Plant and that, but you had Roger Daltrey, who was a major star in Tommy. He was, you know, when I was at school, all the girls had posters of Roger on the wall, you know, which was lucky for me because I knew a lot about the Who. But, you know, Pete always writes for Roger's voice. You know, if you listen to Pete's demos, I mean, his drums try to mimic Keith.
Yes.
His bass tries to mimic John.
Yeah.
You know, and he could do it on his own. I suppose the relationship between them was that, you know, Roger is the singer, these are through. And the reason he lays the guide vocals down is because Roger wasn't actually in the studio with them during Who Are You. Right. The band were working daytime, 9 till 5, and Roger would come in the evening to put down his vocals. The only ever present in all the sessions was John, who was working on he was helping with the production. And to go back to what you said earlier, Jeff, about the Glyn Johns mix, I mean, neither Pete or Roger can recall hearing that mix. You know, the band, you know, the story was the band didn't like it. But it turns out it was John that didn't like it. John didn't like the way his bass sounded on it. But Pete
and I get that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Pete and Roger say they never heard it. So that's quite an interesting change in the sort of folklore of the album. How that came about.
Interesting. So obviously you guys have heard it. Can you tell us what is the big difference in the Glyn Johns production versus the one we got with John Astley? What are some of those differences?
I think we've just touched on the bass and the guitar.
With bass and guitar, but
Yeah,
overall,
I mean, it's
drier.
much a rock and roll record than if you haven't listened to Who Are You Back to Front, you can do this before the box set comes out. It is very much. It now doesn't sound so dated because it's been so long, but for a long time in the 80s and 90s, it did have a very dated sound because it was so synth heavy, and it didn't sound to me very Who-ish. It was very synth heavy, and the guitar work was kind of down low and whatever. And I think what's different about this is Glyn Johns has a way of mixing records where you can hear everything, and you can hear all the guitar work. And being able to hear all the guitar work, think of it in the way you hear all the guitar work on Who's Next, for example, right? It's all sort of right there in the song, along with the synth and organ parts, right? So I think that's the best way to describe what's different about it. It sounds more like a band in a room than it does a studio confection, even though it's not. I'm grasping at straws here.
No,
I'm trying to describe the sound of a record.
Yeah. But one of the things that I really wanted on there as well was the tracks that rolled Roger up so much that he came to blows with Glyn, because I needed to hear what Roger was annoyed about, and I think it worked quite well. So it's when they put the strings on Had Enough, etc. We've now got on the box set those versions without the strings, without the orchestrations.
Okay.
Because Roger felt it was unnecessary. I mean, Pete was very big into strings after doing Rough Mix. He worked with his father-in-law, and he's the songwriter. He had every right to see what them songs sounded like. But Roger wasn't too keen on it, and obviously him and Glyn
wasn't too keen.
Come to blows on it.
Well, another great example of that, I mean, like Roger's got the rock god voice, right? But even a song like Love Is Coming Down, like that's a song that's more suited for Pete, I would think. And he gives it to Roger anyway. What do you guys think?
Look, I have no insider information. Matt may have a different take on this, but I have no insider information on any of this, caveat. But, there are only 9 songs. And I think to then start taking any of those away, it becomes less a Who record, right? I mean, even on the later, the records after It's Hard and the other one.
Endless Wire.
Face
Dances.
He only takes 1 on those, right? And those have more 11 each, 11 and 9, 11 and 10. So I just think it's unusual, and I don't think he would have given up evidence front anyway. But that's a whole other story. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. What do you? Well, I think it's writing to brief again. It's writing to brief. These are Who's.
Yeah. Roger also took John's songs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
It was pretty much, Roger's the singer. This is the album.
Well, you bring up a nice pivot to John Entwistle, because it looks like on the 3rd disc you've got a slew of Entwistle demos on here too, some of which I've never even heard about before. Matt, can you speak to some of that stuff?
Yeah.
Well, those are all the ones that were presented to the band.
Okay.
And a lot of it was recorded at Rack Studios. Some of them, 2 of them were sort of discarded from John's first solo album. But he presented them as possibles, and the others are from John's science fiction album, which at that stage he was looking to amalgamate with Lifehouse. So there's a lot of the Lifehouse history running through there, like 905, Had Enough.
Yeah, like Jeff said, we got a lot of there's strands of Lifehouse even twinged in this release. Yeah.
I mean, Pete said it himself at interviews at the time that a lot of it is driven by Lifehouse. And there was a new script going around.
It was
helping to work on, and it did look like the film was going to be made. It got to a stage where Nick Rogue was interested, but it seems that Lifehouse has had that sort of checkered history where it gets to a certain stage and then falls. I mean, obviously, hopefully we got to the end of it with the Who's Next box set. I think with the graphic novel, etc. Although there's still talk of film, TV, or whatever. And that's why John's was prevalent. And as Pete says, he came forward with a lot of ideas which wasn't necessarily forthcoming on other albums.
What a cool little nugget about this album. You got to look at the liner notes carefully. If you'll miss it if you don't look carefully, is the fact that Rod Argent is on the record.
Yeah,
Rod Argent plays on a couple of the tracks. Was Rod contacted at all with putting any of this together or no?
Well, I had so much bad timing with this. I'd set up to talk to Rod, and then he had a massive stroke. I was told that Glyn was incapacitated through a heart condition. At the time, so I couldn't get to talk to Glyn either. So a lot of it was sort of going through old interviews, and luckily there's some really good interviews with Rod on YouTube. But he was actually contracted originally to appear on the whole album, but because the recording process was so protracted, he'd already signed up to do an album with Andrew Lloyd Webber and Joan, and he felt that he had to do it. He'd given his word that he would do it. And Pete, and there is this bit where Pete says to him, "Are you sure you don't want to work with us? Are you sure you don't want to carry on?" And Rod, from what I can work out, really wanted to carry on, but he'd already said that he was going to work on this other album. So otherwise, he would have been on all of the tracks.
It's interesting to look at this now in context. I mean, they're on tour right now, wrapping up, I think, in a couple of weeks' time. This comes out in a few weeks. And we are in this kind of era now where things from the 70s now by the Gen Zers get reviewed and they're like, wow, this is really good. You've seen it with McCartney, you've seen it with Dylan, and you're seeing it with The Who now. Where does this now reshape the legacy of The Who overall? Like, will it ever eclipse the Who's Next Tommy period? Probably not. But I think looking at it now, like for the Gen Zers out there who are all going to hear this going, wow, where does this stand now on the shoulders of their legacy as they kind of wind down and say goodbye? And, this is going to be one of the last box sets that come out. Where do you guys think that this record stands, 5-10 years from now? Is it just going to be like, oh, it's their last album? I have felt it's always been a quality release. Is it not Quadrophenia or Tommy or Who's Next? No, but it's damn good. And I'm very curious where this now sits as the Who say goodbye.
I think it needed reassessment. I think in the past it's been fairly poorly treated because the only track most people know is the title track. But there are some fantastic lyrics, there's some fantastic playing, and it is a very good album. It's not the best, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I've got a great new album coming out soon, and but I certainly looked at it with fresh eyes, and I was really pleasantly surprised by the complexity of it. As I say, at that stage when it came out, I was listening to the Pistols, I was listening to the Clash, whatever, and then that comes out, and it was totally not what was expected. I mean, there were some radio shows over in England, Capital Radio, and they had some interviews with Pete, and he played some of his demos on there. And like when they played "Who Are You," it was this long, rambling piano piece, and it was a longer version that's ever been released subsequently. But I think that's because it got cut up in pieces by John Astley over the years to make different versions, and it was just like, wow. I suppose it was as eye-opening as listening to punk for the first time. That after a couple of years, you're going back to this sort of almost prog rock.
Yeah.
That was so unexpected. It was so far out of the box at that stage. No one was doing that. Everyone was trying to sound like the Sex Pistols and the Clash.
Right.
And Pete went totally the opposite direction. And I would have loved to have seen Keith tour that album.
Oof.
I think that's the one thing. I did say to ask Roger when I interviewed him, do you think Keith would have been up for a tour? Would have been fit enough? And Roger said, yeah, I was getting fit. Keith was horse riding, he was doing all sorts of things to get fit. And And Roger said that he basically would say, I'll get Pete on the road, you get yourself on the road, blah, blah. And I think that would have been a wonderful thing to have Keith playing some of those tracks, but with the addition of Rabbit, because you can really hear what Rabbit brings to the party. The Who as a four-piece will never be surpassed. There's no way. But it was a new beginning from,
It was an evolution of the band. Yeah.
I mean, Jeff, late 70s, you're probably what? Like young, like what? How old were you when this came out?
12.
12.
Yeah. But
was it on your radar or?
Yeah, it was. I was pretty precocious in that regard because I was already. I went to see the Professionals, snuck into a Professionals show, the remnants of the Pistols in around this time. So I was already a wannabe musician. I always thought, just to Matt's point, I always thought if you flipped It's Hard and Who Are You, both records would have done better. I'm not It's Hard. I'm sorry, Face Dances. Face Dances in 79 and Who Are You in 82, 81, 82. I thought both records would have done better. But look, I think with regard to your question, I don't think we know what records what we're finding is, I just did a piece for Cream about how, there's this whole underground love for Dion's record with Phil Spector from 1975, right? Now, that record wasn't even on my radar. I'd heard it, but it's such a dirgy kind of, all the songs are that kind of slow, giant Phil Spector production. The vocals are great, but it just kind of feels like, Lennon's Rock and Roll Sessions or something. So listening to it fresh and talking to Dion about it, and how it's gotten this huge resurgence with this younger generation, we don't know. They may think, Quadrophenia, Tommy could be, that's a hippie record, The Fringe and all this. It's just not for us. Not being able to see it played live the way, like my brother saw it played live. I think that changed everybody's perception of what the record was, because, you can't go back to the vinyl after you've seen the Who play it live in 70, 71 and not be kind of affected by it. Same with Who's Next. We've all seen them play, certainly back in the day, those songs. They're, when you go back to the recordings, your memory is filling in the gaps of what you've seen live. So, people now who have no sense of what the Who were like as young people, just being able to access the recordings. I've written about, this with regard, the whole Paul Simon kerfuffle people can look up, that we don't know what records or what artists are going to be held up in esteem. And so certainly, in 100 or 200 years, if people are listening to Who Are You, they may prefer that for some reason or another. And let me just add that because, what Matt was saying is the writing is really, really strong. It's a well-recorded record. The orchestrations, the arrangements of the synths, everything the interplay, and it's a very, it's got a lot on it, but it sounds big because it's sparse. It's got that mix where it sounds like there's 48 tracks or 96 tracks.
Right.
There's not, it's very, very precise arrangement. So I think it's very hard to say.
I think the lasting legacy, I mean, if you take case in point, I'd argue right now, you could ask a 20-year-old right now to name 2 Who songs. I bet you one of them is going to be Who Are You, because of the huge, I mean, it's everywhere. I was teaching a class the other day and we had the television on and there was an advert for some bank and Who Are You was the song. I'm like, so it's been everywhere. It might be the most commercially successful Who song from this album. I mean, there is a case. Would you guys agree?
Oh, without doubt. Yeah. I mean, the
CSI
franchise and all that.
All that, yeah.
I remember when Pete did that, and we had a long conversation about the death of terrestrial radio. Long before any of us thought of it as dead, he perceived it as dead. and thought, well, how am I going to get Who music to not just my current fans, but new fans? Well, let's do this deal that, gives this franchise that's going to, appears like
Yeah.
it's going to be wildly successful. The, exclusive on these songs for a certain amount of time. And, so they successively use these Who songs. We just saw them. The Garden goes crazy for those 3 songs because they're so ubiquitous in the culture now in a way that even when we were growing up, they were big songs, but not like, my mom, who's 99, knows Who Are You, Baba O'Reilly, and Won't Get Fooled Again. That's nuts.
Right. That's how they're going to last. And that's from this album. So, why do you think that happened? What was that? Like, when did all that CSI stuff happen? Like early 2000s?
Yes. Yeah. But it was long before anybody had a perception of radio dying.
Yes.
And I think if you were in the business, and certainly you were getting royalty statements and you were seeing pockets that were dipping and so on, you could read the tea leaves better than the rest of us could. But he was very adamant that this was a way for him to get Who music in front of current and successive audiences. I was very I don't have any beef with that, but I thought it was surprising. And now, of course, it makes perfect sense.
You
as
could
does
argue,
Lifehouse, which is crazy.
As does Lifehouse. It's almost like that kind of like that thing with McCartney. Like he makes more money from Wonderful Christmas Time than any other song.
It's nothing like that, but okay.
Well, it is. Well, because Who Are You is not a song that most people that are educated about the Who would go to. And now that's probably one of their biggest moneymakers. If they look at what they make on that, it's got to be up there. Yeah. I know you're saying it's nothing like that, and it's not.
No, I'm teasing. I'm just.
You know what I mean.
Yes.
Jeff loves Paul McCartney, Matt.
I do. I have the new Wings book right here. I was looking at it. It's amazing. Everybody's going to love it. There's going to be a whole conversation about his 70s work that, I think will be really interesting.
We talked about it, Paul and Pete working on that song "Angry" from Press to Play, and we said we put those two guys in one room, and Phil Collins, and that's the song they came up with. Ooh.
Yeah, I've talked to him about that. I'm sure I said it if I was on the show because I would have been more prepared about it. But I know we've had a conversation about that.
Matt?
I will add to this conversation. I think part of the legacy of Who Are You in the immediate aftermath was so colored by, they kept themselves really busy with The Kids Are All Right and Quadrophenia, and then they went right on the road. And I think those, the rehearsals with Kenny are super interesting. It's in those early shows, people can find bootlegs. It's not the 82 version of the Who that we know really well. It was much looser and much more fun. But I've talked to him extensively about that period and about Mooney. And not at my prompting or anything. It's just something that came up many times over the years. And he's, Pete is still very, very heartbroken about that. Has, I think, a mix of, and this is not something he said, this is this is just me sort of the subtext, there's survivor guilt going on there. There's anger going on there. And there's such a sadness because, I think Mooney, it was really his foil and his brother in the band. It's like you think of Keith and Charlie. I don't think we think of the Who anymore because it's been so many years as it being so focused on Pete and Keith. Pete and Keith doing this dance and Roger singing to that and John playing to that. And Matt, certainly can school me on this, but that was always a conversation we had. And I remember talking to him about, finding that same. I saw shows where I thought he was finding that same. We're talking like 2000, 2001,
Mm.
with Zach, and he was absolutely adamant it was not the same, and understandably so. But I mean, it's never going to be the same. But I think that losing that, on an artistic level for a songwriter, and the guy who is driving the band forward with the guitar and is very much, vying for control visibly on stage with Roger every night. I think that was a really, really hard thing. You see him, you never see him turn around to Kenny the way he did, certainly post 81, the way he did with Keith.
You watch that scene at the end of Kids All Right when him and Mooney embrace after the show, and that hug, that tells you everything you need to know about the relationship those two had.
There's a lot of heartbreak built into that relationship. That just, it just stopped, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's what happens when there's tragedies like this.
And I find it very, very, very interesting now that, Pete's now 80 and he's revisiting now. He's looking at his mortality, looking back at this album now that it's coming out in this big box, right? And he's looking back at this moment in time when basically his world changed forever when Mooney died. And I
think that's Matt, please tell me, because I haven't talked to him about this yet. Was he particularly interested in talking about the album and reflecting on the making of the record? Because anytime I've talked to him about this period, it's been the aftermath. It's always been, the memories are wrapped up in 79, 80, 81.
Yeah. Pete was pretty hands-off on this release.
Yeah.
And I think, though, that the fact that it did deal with that period may have been a reason.
Yeah.
It's bound to bring up bad memories, not necessarily bad memories, but probably the wrong term. But, memories that he didn't want to drag up, maybe. But he was very hands-off. Roger was more involved in this one than he's been previously on any of the releases. I mean, usually Roger just says, "I'll get on with it," but he did actually contribute, to the liner notes anyway, in terms of an interview. But Pete himself, no, he was pretty hands off. And I guess I need to address the fact that we went with John's demos on this and not Pete's. I mean, normally we would have Pete's demos,
which. Yeah, we talked about that before we went on air. Pete's you've got some Pete guide vocals, but there are no Pete demos on this box.
No, there's no. And the main reason for that was that they've been bootlegged so much.
Yeah.
And in
pretty great quality too. So
yeah, exactly. It's fairly studio quality bootlegs, and given the choice of putting on some John stuff that's never been heard, like 905 and stuff like that,
which is amazing.
Yeah. Or going through Pete's bootlegs Pete's demos that have been out before, we decided to go with John's on this one.
Which makes sense because probably some of this stuff is on Scoop anyway. If you have some of the Scoop albums, some of that stuff might already even been on there.
Or the alternative Scoop. And there's so many Who Are You era bootlegs out there that are, Music Must Change and the alternate Who Are You and all these, that I've pulled out recently, to kind of. And you're right that the quality is pretty high in the most recent versions of those. And there's a massive Scoop bootleg that's worth finding for fans.
Is that the genuine Scoop? Is it that one?
I think that's that sounds about right. We can discuss that off there. I'm not going to get into that, but it's worth seeking out if you're a real fan. It's an amazing listen. But yeah, I'm not surprised, but I can't remember ever, except for, talking about Mooney's death, or certainly the aftermath and how that affected everything and certainly affected Pete. I don't really remember ever talking about, except insofar as they related to, there was a Script of Lifehouse also. There were sort of parallel projects happening, and that Lifehouse, that there was maybe this other version of Lifehouse that he was writing to, and John was, there was some John demos floating around that, were maybe good, but I don't remember ever having anything specific conversation. But not that we've talked about every album. It's just, he's a talkative guy, when Matt will attest to this, he likes to talk. He likes to tell stories. He likes to talk about his creative process. He likes to talk about, you know, his songs, his babies. So once you get, and he loves to talk about Mooney, you know, I think in particular, not so much anymore. It's much more about John now because we've reached a point where it's easier to talk about John, I think. But yeah, because, you know, I think there was a lot of anger with John after John's passing. So there was, you know, it's a whole other topic. But yeah.
It is. But it is funny, the hands-off approach, Matt, that you mentioned with Pete on this release, because that was not the case with Who's Next in 2023. Oh, no. I mean, Pete wrote so much for that release, and this one he's kind of just left you to it this time around.
Yeah, certainly with the liner notes on that, we worked really closely together, and there was lots of stuff that I was bringing up that Pete could remember, and lots of stuff that put things in place for him that he wasn't aware of at the time, but it sort of all made sense to him. How about, you know, what was going on with Kit Lambert, etc.
Yeah.
The deals in the background. So yeah, that was really good. I really enjoyed that's probably the nearest we've shared a creative process for many years, and it was really good. But on this one, it's pretty hands off. I sent him some questions, and he seemed to think that I already had the answers in mind that I was looking for. So,
oh my God, yeah, all right. Sorry, guys.
So after that it became pretty hands off. But he has read the notes, and he does think that they're really good and didn't know what happened at the time.
Matt, in an email you had sent me, you guys have just celebrated the 30th anniversary of the first Who convention. Talk a little bit about that.
Yes, 30 years. It's amazing, really. Just the Who were doing nothing at sort of 95. You know, the box set, the 30 years box set had just come out, and there was some sort of reissue packages starting to come out. And myself and a few friends, all Who fans, decided that they'd suffered but badly at the hands of the record company with cheap compilations, and you know, I thought their legacy was going to pop, really. You know, it was about that time, you know, my generation was used for adverts for ice lollies and stuff like that. And, you know, we've gone through that, and, you know, Pete's got every right to do that, obviously. But at the time, it seemed as though they was becoming that sort of band from the 60s that were going to get forgotten. So we just got together, 6 of us, decided that we was going to hold a convention in London. And the one aim we had was to get the band to play. You know, the sort of things after half a dozen pints that you think you can manage. Yeah, easy.
And didn't even have a drummer at that point, by the way.
No.
We gave ourselves very little time, really, 6 months to put it all together. But we did pull off a convention in London, Shepherd's Bush, where the band, you know, the early stronghold was. And we didn't get the Who to play, but we did get Roger and John to play, with Zach on drums, Simon on guitar. And that was in the September, just 16th, just gone. And then in the January, I started a fan club magazine called Naked Eye, which the band took on officially. Got an interview with Pete when they was rehearsing for Tommy at the West End. Went really well. You know, we was expecting 30-minute interview. We got 2 hours plus. It went really well, and then within no time, all the band were announcing Quadrophenia at Hyde Park. So it was all happened, you know, in the right place, right time, and you know, stars aligned, etc. And the band were back together. We just celebrated 30 years of that. So for the past 30 years, professionally, I suppose, I've been connected in Who stuff. 54 years as a fan.
Fantastic. Of course, the Quadrophenia revival, that was when they kind of brought everybody out, and they, you know, and I know that was a sticking point with some of the band and retelling the story, and I'm so glad when they revisited it in 2012, they just played the album properly.
Yeah, it was all that weird thing, wasn't it, of going out as Townsend and Whistle and Daughtry,
Yeah, that was weirdly billed. Jeff, did you see any of those shows?
Yeah. I saw. Yeah, they did a run. They did a week here in '96.
Yes, in the summer.
Garden.
Yes,
And I went to most of those, and then they came back again in '97, I think, and did a more stripped down, because there were internal battles over that whole thing, and they didn't have Billy Idol and Gary Glitter and all that, and they were able to take it on the road. They had to strip it down to be able to take it on the road. By '99, 2000, they were out playing as the Who. But look, I remember those Quadrophenia, that week of shows at the Garden, and the motivation, and I don't think this is speaking out of school to say this, but I know the motivation was largely money. It was, I know that they wanted to see if it could work, and they, between themselves as much as anything else. But there was a lot of money on the table to do those shows, because you got to remember that was the pivot point of when ticket prices started to rise.
A little bit.
A week of shows, 20,000 people times, what was it, 7, Matt?
Yeah,
I think it was 7 shows. It wasn't exactly a week. It was over the course. Yeah, 6. Yeah.
I do remember that, but it was being specifically billed though. It was those three performed the Who's Quadrophenia. It was not the Who.
Quadrophenia. Exactly. I remember all that. Being in the air, all sorts of reasons.
Yeah.
I'll punt that.
As we wrap up here, let me just get you guys real quick. Top 3 tracks on Who Are You? What are you? What are your top 3 favorite songs? Matt, you first.
Had Enough, Who Are You, and I've got a penchant for Love Is Coming Down.
Okay.
It's actually a really hard question, because I'm going through the track list. I got to put Who Are You in there because it's just so great. And Mooney is, amazing on it. I'm going to go with my favorite track from the time, which is Sister Disco. And I guess Music Must Change, because I remember getting that record around the time it came out, listening to it with headphones on. And, you drop the needle and it kind of takes you on a journey, and that's what we love about records, certainly back in the day.
Absolutely. For my money, I'll go Guitar and Pen, which I love. Guitar and Pen. That's one.
Yeah, you can't go wrong here.
Yeah, you can't go wrong. Guitar and Pen, new song, and I'll go Who Are You for that, right out of the gate for me.
But it just shows you that what great songs they are. We came up with 3 different choices. Who Are You is the only constant.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the rest are all different. So it just shows you what a great album it was.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We picked all the songs except 905. Which I don't dislike, by the way. I love it.
No.
It's like, yeah.
Not at all. So this box set is out, I believe, on the 31st of October.
That's right.
Available to pre-order now on thewho.com or Amazon or anywhere else. And it's really good bang for buck with this. 7 CDs and a Blu-ray for about $100. You can't beat that these days in box set land, and how much those things cost. So head on there to go pre-order that.
Just to add to it, Andy, I think that the actual presentation is a really good presentation. I think Richard Evans, the design of the book that comes with it is really nice. It really ties in with the sort of the theme of the original album, the colours and everything. I think Richard did a really good job on this.
Yeah, and Matt, you have a 12,000 word essay that accompanies this, so I'm looking forward to diving into reading that. It's going to be, who could think 12,000 words on Who Are You, but
easy, no problem.
I thought I'd struggle with it.
But I have to say, just for anyone who's watching this who hasn't, and some of them are out of print or hard to get, I mean, particularly my generation, but all of these box sets across the years, the Quadrophenia Director's Cut, the last one, the Who Sellout, the Who's Next Lifehouse, and I, I really love that Who Sellout box, and wrote, interviewed Pete and Barney, Richard Barnes about it, and they're just all so enlightening an experience to go back to. I just went back to the Tommy one. And now we get the benefit of, the Atmos mixes and the surround sound mixes and all that. And it's just incredible. It's, they're really, really important works. And Matt's role and everybody's role in this is really significant.
They really are. And the Who have so few albums that they really do deserve this treatment. They don't have 30 albums. They don't. We've got this now. Now do we have
Got
to wait
30
another
great
8?
hits.
We have 30 great hits. Do we have to wait another 8 years now, Matt, or 7, 8 years now to get the Who by numbers, possibly? Which
I'm I'm not in the loop so much.
all right.
But I do know that there are plans for other releases,
There you go.
which I've not been involved in up to now.
I'll look for that down the pike. Mr. Slate, what are you up to? Where are you playing next? And what's going on at jeffslatehq.com?
Hitting the road next month. We're doing a series of it's Tom Petty's birth. Well, first we're kicking off October with the John Lennon birthday show, a couple of them, celebrating the 1-to-1 concert and the new box set, and then we're going on the road, playing a couple of Petty birthday shows, and then I'm hitting the road with the Wallflowers, opening up for them, and then back in the city to do Merry Keefmas for our holiday show, and then hopefully there'll be a break. I don't think so. I mean, we were just going over yesterday the 26 calendar, and it looks like there's no break. Last year there was a break between Christmas and sort of spring, but not anymore. So lots coming up. It'll all be announced.
And that awesome monthly residency at the Cafe Wa. Just keep going there to check Jeff out there.
Since we didn't do one, we're not doing one in September. We're doing one at the beginning of October for Lennon, at the end of October for Petty, which hasn't been announced yet, but you're getting the exclusive.
Right here for that. Matt, how can people get in touch with you for all your photography and your writing?
Just through my website, really, mattkent.photography. If they want to get in touch, only the nice ones, please.
If you don't have this book, gang, you got to get this book. This is, again, the Who Bible of Bibles that he wrote with, Andy Neill. I mean, when did this first come out? Like, I'm trying to remember.
2002. It came out the day after John died.
That's right.
I was going to say, I'm so old, mine's hardcover.
I am working on another book though. Which will be even bigger than that one. I'm trying to do a really rich visual history of the band.
Ooh,
great.
So I've been working on it for about a year now.
Keep us posted.
Hopefully not too long.
Yeah. All right, gentlemen. Well, listen, thank you for being here today. I really appreciate a little bit of a deep dive on Who Are You, the Super Deluxe box set finally coming out. Very happy about that. Jeff Slate and Matt Kent, thank you very much for being here today, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Jeff.
thanks.
See you later.
See you guys.
Bye.